Hey, what's going on, YouTube? So I'm usually a douchebag in a muscle shirt, but today I'm not wearing a muscle shirt, and I'll get to why I'm not. Maybe I'm making a point, or maybe I'm. Anyway, I'll get to that in a bit. Anyway, this video is. It's been a while since I did an anthropology video, so today I'm doing a response video to a pretty big YouTuber who calls herself a history with Kayleigh. I'm pretty sure her name's Kayleigh. I'm not 100% because of the K. Yeah, history with Kayleigh. Anyway, she did a video recently entitled. Yeah, I'm unprepared as always, but it was a video on the skin tone of Neanderthals. What did Neanderthals look like? What was their skin tone? That was the subject of the video. And this is my thoughts on that subject. First, I want to talk about Kayleigh a little bit. She's a pretty good YouTuber. Her information is pretty solid. That said, I think there are equally as good and in some cases even better anthropology YouTubers who get a lot less attention than she does. Why does she get so much attention? Look at her. You know, it's like, yeah, I mean, yeah, she's easy on the eyes, and I would say she gets more attention because of that, and and then I thought, can I really criticize that when I do a bunch of videos where I'm trying to show off my guns and shit? Let's do one video where I don't do shit up with my guns, and I'm wearing just a t-shirt today, but yeah. And I always wear leather. Not always, but a lot of times I like leather jackets. So when I'm not douching it up with a muscle shirt, I'm douching it up with some 1950s shit, I guess. Anyway, yeah, but anyway, respect to Kayleigh, but at the same time, it irks me a little bit that I know these other guys who say like the same kind of stuff as she does, except maybe a little better, a little more detail, and they're never gonna get, as known of as she is because they're not as easy on the eyes. Yeah. So yeah, that's just. But it's maybe it's a good thing. People who otherwise would not know some stuff about anthropology maybe are more enlightened because they're like, oh, let's click on the hot chick, and then they're like, oh, I learned something today too. So I guess it's a good thing. But yeah, it's just the world we live in. It's a little unfair, ain't it? Anyway, on to Neanderthals and their skin tones. So she mentioned at the beginning of her video that people in the Middle East and Asia tended to portray Neanderthals darker skin, whereas Europeans would portray them as lighter skin, and I guess she was kind of implying that there was this implicit cultural bias, like where we think of them as looking like us or whatever. She probably has a point there, but at the same time, Neanderthals were, many of them at least, indigenous to Europe, so it kind of makes sense that Neanderthals might have lighter skin tone compared to other hominins at the time because they ranged further north in many cases. So I'm not sure if that's entirely due to that bias, but nonetheless, sure, there might be something to that. Anyway, there may be. It probably is when we're talking about Neanderthals. We're probably not talking about just one group that looked the same. We have DNA evidence. Neanderthals lived in what is now the Middle East and Europe, and in both southern Europe and further north in Europe. Not extremely far north, because back in those days there was ice sheets covering the very far north, but kind of northern centralish Europe. We had they were discovered in the Neanderthal Valley of Germany. It was where they were first discovered. Around that area, it's probably the northern-ish extent, maybe a little further north than that. It was about where they ranged. Anyway, and we know from genetic evidence now that in the very far north, Neanderthals had light skin. Some of them even have a gene that would probably have given them reddish hair. That said, Neanderthals in the Middle East were probably very dark skinned, and Neanderthals in Southern Europe were probably somewhere in between those extremes. So it wasn't just one Neanderthals looked like this. No, like us, they were a range of characteristics from light to dark skin, and probably various shades in between. I think there was probably basically three types. There was the Middle East, very dark, Northern Europe, very light, and Southern Europe, somewhere in between. And they probably mixed, and it probably got more complicated. Maybe a small number of them in the Middle East had lighter skin because they had mixed with the European ones at some point, and things like that could have easily happened. So, how much tone DNA, how much does that affect us today? Well, we only have a very small amount of DNA from Neanderthals. If you're a full blood, if you're fully African ancestry, you have some Neanderthal. You most likely have some Neanderthal ancestry, but it's probably less than 1%. If you're anybody outside of Africa, you probably have somewhere between 1 and 3 or 4%, depending on how it's calculated. Some say 3 is kind of the max. Some say 4, and there are rare individuals that are a little above 4, and so on. But it might be more like a little above 3. Anyway, that's a whole nother, how they calculate it is a whole nother controversy. So does that mean that if you have light skin, you inherited that from some small percent of their DNA? Probably not, because now that said, some of those genes we do have Neanderthal genes that live on us, which can affect things like how much dandruff you have. That said, so some small amount of DNA which affects our sensor could be traced all the way to Neanderthals. That said, Homo sapiens came out of Africa. Our Homo sapien ancestors came out of Africa approximately 60 to 80,000 years into the Middle East, where they intermixed with Neanderthals and then spread all over the world. And they were probably relatively dark-skinned, although over time they probably were getting slowly lighter as time progressed. Very light-skinned humans didn't start to appear in large quantities till maybe 8-ish thousand years ago, due to a combination of living in northern latitudes for a long time and a change of diet which did not provide enough vitamin D. Therefore, it is my opinion that the Neanderthal DNA does not have much to do with why we are lighter skinned today. It was a much more recent adaptation, although maybe having a little bit of that in our distant past might have helped facilitate it a little faster than it otherwise would have. And that's another thing. Neanderthals eventually became lighter skinned due to lighter in skin tone, due to living in northern latitudes where not much UV ray was hitting them, so they needed more vitamin D, yada yada. However, I think that the process of them getting lighter skin probably took a longer time than it did for Homo sapiens. Neanderthals generally had a diet high in meat, which would give them plenty of vitamin D. Nonetheless, it would probably still be a little bit of an advantage to get a little more from the sun. So over time, it was helped them get a little bit healthier. But my guess is it probably took maybe a few tens of thousands of years for them to become light skinned. Whereas with modern humans, it seems to have happened pretty rapidly over the course of only a few thousand years. And the reason for that is because of the big dietary change that modern humans started to get a more diverse diet during the agricultural revolution, when we started eating a lot more grains, trading with one another for diverse foods, and also other types of farming. More dairy products started to kick off at this time, etc. So yeah, I think that's just an interesting note. We both evolved into this lighter skin tone, but given the dietary thing, and this is kind of me speculating, I don't think we know for sure how long it took, but that's my kind of theory that they got that way. At least a few of them in the north did, but it probably took some time because they probably didn't have the dietary factors that modern humans did to facilitate it being more of an advantage. So yeah, that's about it. I think. I thought I had one more thing here. Yeah. So yeah. Skin tone variation of Neanderthals. Been a little bit. Been a little while since I did an anthropology vid, so figured I'd do that. Maybe there's a little bit of a manosphere tie-in with my comments on Kayleigh and how we judge things based on appearances. Yeah, I'm sure I probably if I had, you know what, let's just stop there. Let's just stop there before we get in trouble. Yeah, but anthropology vid completed. Let's say. See ya.